A family of four could buy a house, own two cars, take a summer vacation, and still put money into savings, all on one income. That was middle-class America in the 1970s. This was a decade caught between the optimism of the post-war boom and the uncertainty of what came next. Inflation was rising, gas lines stretched around the block. Watergate shattered trust in the government. But somehow ordinary American families were still building lives that felt solid, comfortable, and full. Friday nights meant something. Neighborhoods meant something. A handshake from your employer still meant something. The middle class was the backbone of the country, and the 1970s were the last decade when that felt unshakably true. Let us walk through what daily life actually looked like for those families. Some of this might bring back memories. Some of it might explain why so many people look back at this era and feel something they cannot quite name. Let us step into that world. The middle-class American home in the 1970s had a look that anyone who lived through the decade would recognize instantly. Earth tones dominated everything. Avocado green refrigerators, harvest gold stoves, burnt orange countertops. These were not quirky choices. They were standard. Walk into any suburban kitchen in 1974 and you would see these colors repeated across the appliances, the wallpaper, and the linoleum floor. Shag carpeting covered living rooms and bedrooms in deep browns, rusts, and golds. It was thick enough to lose things in and nearly impossible to keep clean, yet families loved it. Wood paneling lined basement walls and sometimes entire living rooms, giving homes that warm, enclosed feeling that defined the era. Macrame plant holders hung from ceiling hooks. Spider plants cascaded from shelves. Every home seemed to have a fern or two, adding green to the brown and orange palette. The living room centered around the television set, a large, boxy piece of furniture encased in fake wood grain. Most families had one television in the house, maybe two if they were fortunate. There were 3 major networks and a handful of local channels. No remote control in most homes. Someone had to get up and turn the dial. The TV Guide was a weekly publication that families relied on to plan their viewing. Missing a show meant missing it entirely. There was no way to record it, no way to watch it later. Families gathered together because watching television was a shared experience, not a private one. The kitchen table was where everything happened. Families ate dinner together nearly every night. The wall-mounted telephone with its long, curly cord was almost always in the kitchen, which meant zero privacy. Teenagers would stretch that cord around corners, into closets, down hallways, trying to have a conversation without the whole family listening. Long-distance calls were expensive, so people kept them short and saved them for special occasions. The middle-class family car in the 1970s was big. Full-size sedans from Ford, Chevrolet, and Chrysler dominated driveways. Station wagons were the family vehicle of choice, often with wood grain paneling on the sides and a rear-facing third-row seat where kids sat waving at the cars behind them. These cars had wide bench seats and no seat belts in the back for most of the decade. Fuel efficiency would horrify anyone today. 8 or 10 miles per gallon was typical, and nobody cared until 1973. The oil crisis changed everything overnight. Gas prices spiked, stations ran dry, lines formed that stretched for blocks, and people waited an hour or more just to fill their tanks. Some states implemented odd-even rationing based on license plate numbers. The crisis shook the middle class because everything about American suburban life depended on cheap gas. The commute to work, the drive to the grocery store, the summer road trip. Suddenly, the one thing everyone had taken for granted was uncertain. Smaller Japanese cars from Toyota and Datsun began appearing in American driveways, and Detroit panicked. Before we continue with the culture and daily rhythms that define middle-class life, if you are enjoying this look back at how Americans really lived and want to explore more decades and places, consider subscribing. There are so many more stories about how ordinary people built the world we know today. The suburbs were where the American middle class lived, and in the 1970s, suburban neighborhoods had a rhythm that everyone understood. Kids left the house in the morning and did not come back until dinner. They rode bikes without helmets, played in streets, explored woods, and built forts. Parents did not worry the way they would in later decades. The neighborhood was its own safety net. Everyone knew everyone. If a kid got in trouble 3 houses down, that neighbor handled it and told the parents later. Summer meant the sprinkler in the front yard, catching fireflies at dusk, and the ice cream truck whose melody sent kids sprinting from backyards with coins in their fists. Neighborhoods had block parties. Families borrowed sugar from each other. Dads stood in driveways on weekends working on their cars. Because fixing your own vehicle was normal, expected, and almost a point of pride. Shopping in the 1970s meant going to the mall, and malls were in their golden age. Enclosed shopping centers spread across suburban America, becoming social destinations as much as retail spaces. Department stores like Sears, JCPenney, and Montgomery Ward anchored these malls. The Sears catalog was still a massive publication that arrived twice a year. Families would page through it together, circling Christmas wishes. Ordering from the catalog and waiting weeks for delivery was its own kind of excitement. Woolworths had lunch counters where shoppers could sit on swivel stools and order a grilled cheese and a milkshake. These were community gathering spots where people ran into neighbors and caught up. Grocery shopping happened once a week at chains like A&P, Kroger, Safeway, or Piggly Wiggly depending on the region. Coupons were clipped from the Sunday newspaper. Store brands with plain packaging appeared as inflation made families more price conscious. A full cart of groceries might cost $25 or $30. The cost of living in the 1970s was something that middle-class families could manage, at least at the start of the decade. A modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs might cost $25,000 to $35,000. A new car cost around $4,000. A gallon of milk was about $1.20. A movie ticket was $2. These numbers sound impossible now, but wages were lower too. The median household income was around $12,000 in 1970 and rose to about $17,000 by 1979. The math worked. A single income could support a family, pay a mortgage, and still leave room for modest extras. But inflation ate away at that security throughout the decade. Prices rose year after year. By the late 1970s, inflation was running above 10%. The comfortable math that had defined middle-class life was getting harder to balance. More women entered the workforce, partly out of desire for independence, partly out of economic necessity. The single-income middle-class household was beginning to fade. Entertainment for the middle-class family was simpler but deeply social. Bowling leagues were enormously popular. Families bowled together on weeknights. Adults joined leagues through work or church. The bowling alley was a community hub with its own culture. Roller skating rinks drew teenagers on Friday and Saturday nights. Disco music pulsed through the speakers while kids skated in circles under colored lights, trying to look cool and hoping to hold someone's hand during the couple's skate. Drive-in movie theaters were still thriving in the early part of the decade. Families would load up the station wagon with pillows and blankets, pay by the carload, and watch double features under the stars. Kids would fall asleep in the back while parents watched the second film. Board games and card games filled evenings at home. Monopoly, Life, and Clue were in nearly every household. Families played together because there were only so many channels on television and evenings needed filling. Music defined the decade in ways that are hard to overstate. The 1970s produced an astonishing range of sound. Families listened to the radio constantly. AM radio gave way to FM, and suddenly the sound quality was better and the music was more adventurous. 8-track tape players in cars meant music on every drive. By the late 1970s, cassette tapes were replacing 8-tracks, and making mixtapes became a personal art form. Record stores were gathering places especially for teenagers who would flip through albums, study the cover art, and spend allowance money on vinyl. Disco dominated the mid to late 1970s, but rock, country, and soul were all thriving. Saturday Night Fever in 1977 turned disco into a cultural phenomenon. Middle-class families watched variety shows like The Carol Burnett Show, Sonny and Cher, and later Saturday Night Live. Television was still a shared experience. When a big show aired, the whole country talked about it the next day. School for middle-class kids in the 1970s was structured but far less pressured than today. There was no talk of college applications in elementary school. Kids walked or biked to school. Hot lunches cost maybe 50 cents. Teachers had authority that parents backed up without question. Report cards came home on paper, and a bad grade meant consequences. After school meant playing outside, not structured activities. Sports leagues existed, but they were seasonal and casual. Little League in summer, maybe Pop Warner football in the fall. The idea of year-round travel teams would have seemed absurd. What defined middle-class America in the 1970s was a sense of stability that was real, even as it was beginning to erode. Families could plan, a job at a factory or an office or a school could last a career. Pensions existed. Health insurance came through your employer and covered what it needed to cover. Retirement was something people could actually count on. The neighborhood, the church, the bowling league, the PTA, these were the institutions that held communities together. The decade had real problems. Inflation squeezed budgets. The energy crisis disrupted routines. Watergate shattered faith in leadership. Crime was rising in cities. But for the broad middle of America, daily life still had a structure and a security that many families today would envy. The mortgage got paid. The kids played outside until the streetlights came on. Friday night meant something, whether it was bowling, the drive-in, or just the family gathered around the television watching the Waltons. For those who lived through it, middle-class America in the 1970s was not glamorous. It was ordinary. And that was exactly what made it feel so solid. For those with memories of this remarkable era, there is always more history to explore.